Hey there, guys. Music fan here. How are you guys doing? Um, Today, I want to embark on a top five list for this particular video. This has been a video I've been wanting to conduct for a really long time now, one I had originally had planned for after the YouTube discography review, but I just didn't have the time to get around to until now. So before time runs out and before this video gets any longer, I wanna embark on my top five favorite U2 albums of all time. Um, this is going to be a list of U2 albums that I love, U2 albums that I simply adore, I just simply love, and I can listen to all day, any day of the week, ever. And this list is going to prove to be a little controversial. So if you're wanting to make your own particular list, you can present to me your own top five favorite U2 album list on the comment section below, and let me know what you think. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started with the number five favorite U2 album for me, and that would have to be the third U2 album, War, released in 1983. Of course, this is the album that sees U2 kind of embracing a more post-punk aesthetic into their sound and into their music. Up until this point, they were kind of like perceived to be a very safe, cozy, imaged band that talked about religion and spiritual beliefs in their songs. And while that was all, and that sorry, my throat is running amok here. While that was all great and good, it really didn't translate into the band being any more successful or vital. So with this particular album, U2 stepped up their game and got rawer, they got more raw, they got more visceral, they got more aggressive with this album, and it shows. Songs like Sunday Bloody Sunday, which is of course a classic, New Year's Day, which is of course their first ever big hit of their career, their first hit single in their catalog. But you also have songs like Seconds, songs like Drowning Man, The Refugee, Red Light, Surrender, tracks like that, which kind of spark a very conceptual, if not conceptual, then a very themed, laden nature about escaping from violence, escaping from death, from violence, from destruction, trying to flee into a safe place. And this album, it's just a fantastic U2 album. It's a great album with great U2 songs. Some of them well known, others not really as well known and are very underrated. And of course, the last track, 40, which will prove itself to be a concert staple in U2's live shows in the future. But I love War. I love this album, and it's it's a great album. Number four, and this will maybe entice a lot of people, maybe, I'm not sure, but my number four pick would have to be Achtung Baby. And now I know it sounds a little controversial or something, but hear me out. Achtung Baby, or rather I have to say War, while it is indeed an aggressive and visceral album, Achtung Baby kind of really beats that by miles. And the reason why that is that this album is amongst U2's greats. It's amongst U2's best ever albums ever. And this album, of course, found U2 at a do or die moment in their career, where the epic pompousness of the Joshua Tree era kind of bringing them a sense of accusations of being pompous and very arrogant. And so with this album, U2 tried to reinvent themselves and tried to expand their boundaries as they were entering a new decade. And as much as it felt as like pulling teeth, the hard work proved out to pay off tons. And this album really reintroduced U2 in a way that U2 that the band hasn't been reintroduced before. And of course, we have great, fantastic songs from Zoo Station, Even Better Than the Real Thing. One especially being the song that saved U2 from destruction. Songs like So Cruel, songs like Mysterious Ways, Ultraviolet Light My Way, like some of their most groove-laden songs and some of their most sexiest songs, others being their most darkest of their catalog. I mean, Acrobat, Love Is Blindness, Ultraviolet Light My Way, amongst their most darkest songs in their catalog. This album completely changed the game for U2, and it really stepped them up into a plane that they had never experienced before. As well as with Zoo TV and Bono's various costume alter ego changes. But other than that, this album signified a change. This album signified U2 as a transformation into an entirely different band, the likes of which the world has never seen before, or I can even argue ever since then. And while we may never see this kind of Achtung Baby-like reinventiveness level ever again in their career, it still stands the test of time as being a fantastic U2 album, as being an album that reinvigorated U2 in ways that they have not been reinvigorated before. And it still remains a classic and still remains amongst my favorites. Number 3, I would have to say I would have to place All That You Can't Leave Behind. Now again, this can prove to be a little controversial for some, but the reason why I put All That You Can't Leave Behind over Achtung Baby, even though I love all these albums equally, it would have to be because I have a more deeper sentiment towards this album than I am with Achtung Baby and War, even though I do love those albums. I like this album more because, well, not even more, but I like this album also because of the songs, because of the music on this album. Like, this album, of course, its era was my first ever introduction to U2. I mean, all these beautiful, fantastic songs. Beautiful Day, the song that introduced me to U2 back in 2000, still remains a staple. It still remains one of my favorite U2 songs ever in their discography. And other songs too, Elevation, Walk On, Stuck in the Moment You Can't Get Out Of, Wild Honey, Peace on Earth, When I Look at the World, New York, Grace, fantastic closer, beautiful closer to an album. Of course, this album found U2 kind of re-embracing the basic rock band format after experimenting about a decade with European experimentation throughout the 90s, and it was a welcome return for U2 after a decade of experimentation, and it was greatly welcomed by their fans, especially their American audience that re-embraced U2 because of this album. This album is just fantastic. This album has beautiful melodies, fantastic singing, just really passionate singing in such a way that we haven't heard from Bono in about a decade, in about 10 years. And there's just a sheer band chemistry between all the members of this album just cannot be denied. And this album, to this day, remains amongst some of my favorites of U2's albums, and it's still a fantastic U2 album ever, and I'll never stop listening to it. Now we're in heavy territory right now here. These next 2 albums that I'm about to name in a moment is just like, I struggled long and hard of which of these 2 albums would be number 1 and number 2, because I love both these albums equally. I really, really do. One is their most successful album ever, and the other is a lesser known album that's squished between 2 great albums. But I really have, this is my list, my top 5 U2 album list, and in my list I have to be as honest as possible. My number 2 favorite U2 album ever would have to be The Joshua Tree. Now hold on there. Why would I put Joshua Tree at number 2 when instead it should be number 1? It is their most successful, and they're the album that everyone knows U2 by. And you're completely right. This is an album that I completely love. This is an album that I adore. Of course, I mentioned in my in my Joshua Tree review that this is the immaculate U2 album. This is the Alpha and Omega. This album is the one that made U2 into superstars, the likes of which we know them by today. Their songs, Still Haven't Found, With or Without You, remain radio staples to this very day. And without this album, U2 would not be the mega superstars that we know them as of now. And still, even the songs that are not as known as those other songs are still amazing favorite songs of mine to this day. I mean, In God's Country, Trip Through Your Wires, One Tree Hill, Exit, amongst their most darkest, along with the other Achtung Baby songs, Mothers of the Disappeared, Red Hill Mining Town, all these great, fantastic songs. Bullet the Blue Sky as well, which really kind of harkens back to War a little bit, are still great, fantastic songs, amazing songs. This is Bono at his songwriting zenith on this particular album. Like all these, the lyrical writing to all these songs are just top notch, are the complete apex, lyrically for me at least. And musically, of course, this is them experimenting with blues music, with American music, rock and roll, gospel into their sound, and by using the previous album as a foundational tool to build a more structured set of songs, this album comes out with songs that are just prime. These songs are just amazing, fantastic. Where the Streets Have No Name, my favorite U2 song ever of all time. This album I love, despite the placing of this of the number of this album. It's an album I still love, revere, and cherish to this very day. However, there are perfect albums that one can cherish and adore, but then there are those other particular albums that you not just only cherish and adore, but you also make it part of your own. You make it so into your own life that you just can't imagine life without it. My number one favorite U2 album list will maybe anger some, but again, make your own U2 album list in the comment section below. My number one favorite U2 album of all time, The Unforgettable Fire. Yes, I admit it. The Unforgettable Fire, U2's fourth studio album, is my all-time favorite album, U2 album of all time. Now I know in certain terms this is very controversial, as The Unforgettable Fire is not as known as the Joshua Tree, but hear me out for a second. Why do I love The Unforgettable Fire more than Joshua Tree? Now, essentially, because this is a placing, like these albums have to be put in some kind of place. So, despite Joshua Tree being number 2, it's still an album that I love. But the reason why I love The Unforgettable Fire slightly, just like a tip, slightly, a little more than the Joshua Tree, it's, well, actually, now come to think of it, it's not even so much that I like The Unforgettable Fire more than the Joshua Tree. It's more it's more the sense of like I listen to the Unforgettable Fire more because it's sheer beauty. This album, it's just like so beautiful. It's just like this super, just highly experimental songs, these great, fantastic songs off here. Of course, this is the album that found the debut production work of Brian Eno and Daniel Lanois, two producers that will prove very critical in U2's future album reinvention endeavors in later in their career. And this album, I have to say, is the very first album that we saw U2 reinvent themselves. Now, you can make the argument that War can be considered a reinvention too, since that it doesn't sound anything like the October album, and you are right in that particular sense. However, I have to say that while War does sound different from the October, it's still within the same vein as prime rock and roll, as being a post-punk, a punk rock influenced album in this particular sense. Like that album did have visceralness. This album did have a lot of heart and a lot of anger to it. Unforgettable Fire, however, is not that, or at least in the sense is not a rock album in the traditional sense. Instead, the band kind of used their rock sound to kind of like create a very atmospheric, a very almost cinematic kind of music to the recordings of this album than in the past work. And while some of the songs here can sound a little out of focus for some, and I can completely understand that, because there are no traditional songs off this album. Some of these are very small snippets of a sound of a song. Others are just kind of like this meandering experimentation that lasts for like about 8 or 9 minutes. Others are just a very soft and laden acoustic guitar approach with the songs. Others are just this very hushed lullaby to it. This is it's a lot minimal. That's the word I'm looking for. It's minimal. It's a more minimalistic album than U2 of the past, or even I can dare say even of the future in their career. But this album is simply beautiful. I love this album. Every second, from the first second to the last second, this album I just adore. Like every second of this album I just adore and just bring myself into this album in this album is just so terrific for me. This album may not be a traditional rock album, but it's an album that is a lot more cinematic. It's an album that is very intense with a lot of heart and a lot of just cinematic quality to it. Like, I love this album. I really do. Has some great of course, it has the hit single Pride in the Name of Love, which really brought U2 into a superstar status than the War album did before. Of course, is the tribute to Martin Luther King on that song. To this day, Pride in the Name of Love is still a U2 staple. It's a song that is catchy. It is a high quality kind of song with a great message behind it. And even still then, the other songs here, I mean, check out the title track, Unforgettable Fire. Check out songs like Wire, which has this very stark vocal performance from Bono, and there's just this ear-splitting guitar wail from The Edge. It's just so ear-splitting, so aggressive. And at the same time, too, this also has just beautiful, lush performances. Promenade, beautiful. 4th of July, even though it's an instrumental snippet, still beautiful. Highlights Adam Clayton and The Edge playing together. Bad, we all know Bad. Bad is just a fantastic, beautiful song. Just a song that is very loose and just reaches a climax until it just hits it and then just lets off gently. Like the rest of this album. Indian Summer Sky, fantastically underrated. Elvis Presley in America, underrated. MLK, just the most beautiful closer to an album I have ever heard in my life. Oh wow, I really cannot say anything anymore about The Unforgettable Fire. It's my favorite U2 album ever. Of course, I love all these albums equally, just in different ways. And The Unforgettable Fire is an album that I can fully listen to as an album per se, from straight front to back. I love this album. I really do. And yeah, And I forgot one thing. Really, without the Unforgettable Fire, we would not know of U2 as reinventing themselves. Because think about it. Did U2 really invent themselves in the early 80s with the first three albums? Not really, even though War is still a different album from October and Boy in this sense. The Unforgettable Fire was the first time that U2 reinvented themselves. It was the first time that they challenged themselves to keep growing as musicians. It was the first time they came face to face with this challenge of staying relevant, of staying within the realm of public consciousness. And I think without this album, we would not have albums like Joshua Tree, especially Joshua Tree. We would not have albums like Achtung Baby, albums not like Zeropa, Pop, All That You Can't Leave Behind, Atomic Bomb, No Land on the Horizon, and even Songs of Innocence. We would not have U2 with this prime, hungry energy to them as we know them today. And I think The Unforgettable Fire is really in debt to that, to the rest of U2's career. The first three albums put the foundation of U2's career, and of course that's to be revered. But The Unforgettable Fire, without this album, we would not have U2 as we know them today. We would not have U2 continuously reinventing themselves, continuously like growing and progressing as a band and progressing their personal style. And not even just their personal style, but the style of music in general. This album really, unfortunately, is criminally underrated and is kind of like smashed between two other great albums, War and Joshua Tree. And I think it's kind of sad because I think this album really doesn't get its due in U2's discography and in their fan base. And I think it should be revered more. It should be respected more. It should be cherished more, because without this album, U2 would not know reinvention the way we know reinvention today. This album is a great U2 album. Fantastic songs. Sort of Homecoming, Pride in the Name of Love, Wire, Unforgettable Fire, Promenade, 4th of July, Bad, Indian Summer Sky, Elvis Presley in America, and MLK. All these songs are great, fantastic U2 songs. They are for me, and this is why that this album is my favorite U2 album ever. The atmosphere, the chemistry, the cinematic feel of all these songs, and yeah, what else can I say about this album? What else can I say? Anyway, leave your comments down in the comment section below. Tell me what you think. If you don't like the list that I compiled, then maybe put your own list on the comment section below. Tell me, what are your favorite U2 albums ever? I'm really curious to know what are your favorite U2 albums for you. And that's it. My top 5 favorite U2 albums list, and I will see you guys next time. Mr. Music Fan, U2, top 5 albums, and I will see you guys later. Take care. Bye.